So thank you again for joining us for our monthly webinar series. Today's topic is going to be about custom calculations, which is a feature of OpenAir reporting. OpenAir reporting is something that I very much like to be challenged with, so this topic is near and dear to my heart. Hopefully you guys will take away some good tips from this session. So let's get to the stuff that you guys are dialed in for. Really, it's the custom calculations. This is the agenda that was in the webinar itself, so I'm not going to read this to you, but really I'm going to take you through, what is a custom calculation, what are the options that you have available to you, and how does that interact with reports. And there's some things to watch out for with using custom calculations that maybe, if you're dialing in because you're trying to solve a puzzle, hopefully I'll be able to give you those puzzle pieces and figure out what may be happening with your reports. So if you're not familiar with the term custom calculations, it's a feature in OpenAir. It's a standard feature in the system, and it's found on the administration global settings page. It's down in the bottom where the reports area is, custom calculations, and you create these yourself. They are configurable, but they are an equation, and it gives you the ability to control equations. To be honest, quite popular calculations are related to utilization. The standard utilization reports that are available in OpenAir, like on the user crosstabs or user summary report, really aren't used very much anymore because the custom calculations give you so much more ability in the system. You can set these up to pre-filter, so they're only providing certain pieces of information. There's date range filters as well. I'll give you some tips on that. And just bare basics, you can actually rename standard fields. There is a rename function in OpenAir. There's a terminology page, but there's also a rename, summary, or detail fields. But you can only rename that once. You can actually use custom calculations to come up with as many versions of the same reporting value as you like to help people understand what the value means in context of their report. So before you start working with custom calculations, you should double check with your role. So if you're an administrator, of course, you have access to edit this, but you actually give people specifically the permission to view and modify calculated fields on the role if you want them to have the ability to create custom calculations. Custom calculations can be activated and inactivated, and they're just additional reporting values on reports. So since you can create calculations, they're visible to anyone in the system, there's a little bit of a caution of giving everyone access to this part of the system because they could be creating redundant calculations or creating equations that are not really supporting what you as an organization are measuring. So I would caution the access that you give for people. You can view calculated fields, but view and modify, you may want to limit that. There are also 3 switches. These are internal switches that you can get from NetSuite, enabled in NetSuite. So it's calculated fields using calculated fields, so that's how you can do some nesting. And then report filters and report date filters. Those are all very useful to have at your fingertips, and I'm going to be covering those features in this webinar. Okay. So what is a custom calculation? It's just like the name says, it's a calculation. So you have to set up an equation. If you see the screenshot on the page here, you see that there's a left operand, an operation, and a right operand. The operations are not rocket science. It's plus, minus, times, and divided by. There is also a no operation value here. That no operation value does nothing. So you can't actually create an equation with no operation. So you always have to pick one of the others. And as we get into some of the details here, you're going to find out how easy it is to create the equations with like constants and all the standard fields and custom calculations in the system already. Right. The other thing is when you go to create a custom calculation, you have to tell it what kind of report it belongs to. So for those of you who are using the newer report management interface, types are cross-tabbed and tabular. If you're not using the report management interface, you're seeing tabs called summary and detail in the reporting module. The custom calculations are still using that summary and detailed terminology, So quite often, I recommend people when they're creating custom calculations that you go ahead and create an account-wide company summary custom calculation, because if you have attended any of our reporting webinars, we tend to recommend starting with a company summary report in general. So this will make sense. The calculation would be the same way. So you have to pick the kind of report you need. You want to put it on, and that will give you the list of operands that you can work with on that report. Just as a caution, if you do pick something like, I just want a project report, not account-wide, but it's a project company summary report, that calculation will only be available on that type of report. It won't be on the account-wide report. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. So besides the equation piece of it, there's a filtering section. This is one of the switches I recommend turning on. And the filters you have available to apply to the calculation are the same as in the report version that you pick. So if you pick account-wide company summary, then whatever filters are available in that company summary report are also available here to pre-filter the data. And all the values that you pick here can ideally apply to the values you're selecting in your equation up here. But you can use these filters, and the filters pre-filter the data so that when you include this calculation on your report, it's already filtered for the information you want. And that tends to drive like the naming convention that you use in the system. Okay. Now, there is a tip related to the filtering piece of this. So many of you may have the reporting option turned on. So when you go into the report and you go to a filter, you have an include and an exclude option. So you can exclude things, not include things in the system. Even if you have that turned on, the report filters in a custom calculation do not support an exclude option. Okay. So, the tendency is, well, I'll just kind of keep updating it. I'll just go every week and I'll go add the additional new values that I need to maintain the calculation. And that's really a slippery slope, because you're going to start excluding data before you know it. My recommendation is actually to create your own exclude custom calculation. So first what you do is you create a custom calculation that is filtered on the data that should be excluded, okay? And then you take that calculation and subtract it from the original value, so you essentially have created an exclude option. The example may help explain this a little bit better. So if I created a custom calculation called top step client time, where I'm taking timesheet all hours times 1, which is an equation, and filtering it by the client top step, that reporting value only has top step time. Then I take that top step time and I subtract it from timesheet all hours. Now I have all my time excluding top step. Okay, so this is how you sort of take 2 steps to create the exclude, and that way you don't have to continually update the filtering on the calculation. Now, another set of filters that you can add to a custom calculation are date filters. And so the date filters support sort of a start and end date or a relative date like last week, next week, this month. But it also supports a metadate value where you have things like in the past or in the future in this example that I have there. So the metadate is very a neat function, and there's actually a lot of situations where you may want to control the date range or the date index on your calculation. So the values that you have here are really dependent on how you want the equation to comply with how people are putting data in the system. Okay. Just to let you know, the report options that you turn on for your cross-tabbed or summary report that include the different date filters will show up in your custom calculations automatically. So if you've turned something off for your report filters, your report date filters, it will also be turned off in custom calculations. So there's a little bit of interaction with the report settings that you have. These reporting options are found on Administration Global Settings, again in that little tiny area called Reporting Options in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, the obvious question you may have is, okay, so I can understand, timesheet all hours minus timesheet submitted hours. I'm subtracting two values in OpenAir. But what if I just want to filter timesheet all hours? I just want to filter it on like task type or time type or something like that. Like how can I just filter a single value? And really, it comes back to, I always kind of joke, it comes back to what you learned in kindergarten. Something times 1 is something. Something minus 0 is something. Something divided by 1 is something. So you just use those basic equations so you can create these constants in the system. And there's really two ways to create a constant in OpenAir. One is by using a feature that's also part of the custom calculation situation called custom detail fields. You create a detail field for the types of data you're dealing with. So this screenshot is a time entry. Everyone that has the OpenAir system, the time entry constant is something that's part of the system as it's provisioned. So everyone has this in their system today. And you can just expand on it. You can have a constant 5 and a constant 10 and 100. You can set up constants for charge projections and expense receipts and anything that you need to, you would create constants for in the system. When you set the constant up, you do select the field type, and you'll see, like in this example for time entry, you'll see hours, ratio. I always pick ratio because ratio gives you averages, and when you're dealing with things like utilization, averages are really what you're looking for. So ratio is a pretty common field type that you pick. I also want to be cautious about there's a checkbox at the very bottom of this. This is applied the constant to each transaction. That ends up being sort of a multiplying effect, which is not desirable in the calculation. It's no longer a 1. So I leave that unchecked and I pick ratio, and 1 gives me my constant so that I can do an equation timesheet all hours times 1 or divided by 1, and that would give me the ability to create an equation and then use the filtering like I want to get the reporting value that I need. Okay. But there is a different way. So sometimes when you're doing these custom detail fields, you feel pretty good. You go set up the constant, you set the 1 up, and then you go to try to use it in the equation, and it doesn't show up in the list. It can't be seen by the custom calculation. If you ever run into that, there is a second way to do a calculation, and that is basically take a value and subtract it from itself. You're essentially creating the value of 0. And then what you do in the equation, of course, you say something minus 0 or plus 0, and that would give you the same effect as creating a constant of 1 to multiply and divide. Okay. So pretty simple math, but it is effective because it gives you the equations that you're looking for at the end of the day. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, okay, that's fine, but why can't I just use the same 1 on everything? Why can't I use that time entry 1 value, that constant that's in my system? Why do I have to create a bunch of different ones? And the reason is when you mix types in these calculations, you may get unexpected results. The best example I can talk about is where you are dealing with booked hours. I work with a lot of customers. You use bookings, or you may have renamed them like allocations or schedulings or resource assignments or something. But underneath the covers, it's still like booked hours. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to create a reporting value that breaks up the bookings by maybe booking type or some other custom field that you have on the booking. So in order to do that, you have to have the equation. The equation times something, or times 1 in this case, would give you, booked hours. Booked hours times 1 is booked hours. But if you use the constant 1, that's a time entry definition, okay, which is that screen back here. So if I use this constant of 1, on paper, it looks like it would make sense. It would always give me booked hours, okay? If the project has time on it, then the equation works because there are time entries related to the project. So therefore, when you use this constant of 1, all booked hours times 1 time entry equals all booked hours. However, you probably can see this coming. If the project does not have any time on it, then there is no time record for it to be able to use a constant of 1 to represent. So therefore, all booked hours is multiplied by 0, and now your value is 0. So if you've been struggling with custom calculations, coming up with, it's missing data, check the types that you're multiplying together or subtracting. It works the same way if you subtract. If you subtract a time entry from a booked hour and there's no time entries, you get 0. Even though subtraction, it doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it works. So if you're getting a bunch of zeros and you're not expecting zeros, check your types, because that's really the key, and that's why you want all these different constants in the system, where you're either defining a 0 or you're defining a 1, and when you mix, when you match types, then you're guaranteed that the calculation is going to be correct. So here, here's some example custom equations, custom calculations that, like I said, utilization is a big one. Average bill rate is another one. Being able to compute your own margins. Those are all different equations. So there's usually a mixture of standard fields, custom calculations embedded within custom calculations. You can see, for example, the percent customer utilized, which is the 6th row down. 6th row down. It's using the calculation hours customer utilized divided by base work schedule hours. Well, hours customer utilized is defined above the first row, timesheet approved hours times 1, which means it's probably filtered by something like, time type or task type. So these are all pretty common, and if you look in your system, you probably have something very similar. Utilization is the biggest calculation I see people doing in OpenAir. When you're looking at the list of custom calculations, I do have a recommendation on how the columns should look. So this is an old screenshot, but the column concept still works in OpenAir, the list view. It's very easy to see the equation if you set the equation up according to the columns that represent the field. So left operand, operation, right operand, and then module type, resulting type field, and formula if you really want to geek out and look at the formula that's underneath the covers, right? By organizing the information in this way, you can very quickly see what the base of the equation is, but you can't see anything related to filters, date filters or field filters. You do unfortunately have to open up the custom calculation to be able to see what those filters are all about. And I have a tip later on how to sort of avoid that whenever possible. Now, from a naming convention, when you create your custom calculation, the example I'm going to use is this timesheet all hours minus timesheet rejected hours, something that quite a few customers have asked for from a reporting perspective, because they want to know what are my worked hours on the project, but they don't consider rejected hours worked hours. So you can create your own equation to subtract those out. Okay, so here's my example, worked hours redefinition. Unfortunately, the way it's set up right now, you're going to find this reporting value in the full list of all the things that you can report on. It's going to be called timesheets dash worked hours redef. And the reason why is it's pulling the module from the left operand. So it doesn't matter how far back you have to trace the original equation. Whatever the left operand module is, that's the module that gets associated with your custom calculation, okay? Unless there's a little box there at the bottom that says do not automatically prepend module name to title in account-wide reports. When you check that box, what happens is it truncates the module name. So now you just get worked hours redef. And when you see those kind of fields in your reporting list of values, those measures and the available values to report on, it's very clear that that's a custom calculation because there's no module in front of it. So that's really a recommendation so that you're quickly able to find the custom calculations when you're pulling reports, so you know whether it's a standard OpenAir field or not. If you are using the new report management interface, however, it actually has a little icon. It's like a formula, the FX thing. That little icon designates that reporting value is a custom calculation. So that interface helps interpret it a little bit better too. So naming convention is not as critical anymore if you're using that newer interface. Now, when you're using custom calculation in reports, there's a couple of cautions here, especially as it comes to the different types of filtering that you can do in a calculation. And of course, you can also do the filtering in the report. So if you are pulling in a calculation and you're adding an additional filter. So in this example, I'm going to show you, I'm pulling in billable utilization, bill utilization percentage. The name itself implies that it's a pre-filtered calculation. And in fact, in our system, we've defined it as a filtered time value that's filtering by the task type of billable. Okay. So that's all well and good, but you know, if you put something on a report, the report's not going to stop you from doing anything else. So you could actually add another task type filter to the report that says, but I only want to pull in things that are task type admin. So just looking at that, it seems like that would be a conflict between the two. Like you're basically filtering on a different value than what the reporting value has defined in it, okay? So hopefully this is good news, or it may be bad news, I'm not sure, but basically the custom calculation wins because it has the definition inside of it. It's going to prevail and ignore the task type filter you have. So again, if you are running reports and you're seeing some inconsistent data because you're expecting some filtering to work and it doesn't seem like the filtering is applying, you may be filtering by the same exact field that's defined under the covers in a custom calculation. When you have that conflicting filter option, the custom calculation filter wins. Now, not to confuse you further, but I'm going to, if you have a date filter, so let's say for this example, I set up a reporting value called August hours, and August hours are timesheet hours with a time entry date filter built into the equation, August 1st to August 31st, okay? So for some reason, I decided I needed that as my reporting value. The challenge with using date ranges is you have to make sure the date range of the report is all encompassing of the date range defined inside of the custom calculation. So it's almost the opposite of what I just said about the report filters. So date ranges, you have to make sure they play nice together. In this example, I set up a report and I added a report date range that says 3 previous months as of today, which of course means it's October, September, and October, September. Yes, so it came back, it goes backwards for the August hours. And our August hours value ended up being empty in the report. So actually, I think I put the date range the 18th, not the 19th. Otherwise, it would have pulled data in. So, so the typo. Sorry about that. So the date range, because the date range is outside of the date range of the report, the value will be 0 or blank in the system. So it's almost the opposite of the field filtering on the previous example. The field filtering, the reporting value, the custom calculation wins. It always respects itself. But when there's a date range filter, you have to make sure the report date range encompasses the value of the reporting value date range. That's a tongue twister. Okay. Now, there's another, I said earlier in the webinar, you know, how you could customize your list view to kind of see where the fields are in the list view, so you can see left operand, operation, and right operand, which gives you the basics of how the equation is defined. Now, that's all well and good, but like I said, it doesn't show you the filters that you have set up in the system. You have to open it up to review it. This is where we recommend that you use the description field. So there's this text area definition on the custom calculation. It's definitely recommended that you explain what the calculation is all about. So why do you have it? Are there any dependencies? Are there filters you have to maintain? What's it filtered on? Just so that people have more information about what that reporting value is all about versus just having to rely on the name. Okay. When you hover over the reporting value in the report interface, or you run the advanced report called Summary Report Values. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at that report, but it actually is the report data dictionary of OpenAir. It has the definitions of all the reporting values that are available in summary or cross-tabbed reports. And that would also include your custom calculations. So the better you are at describing what the calculation is in the description field, the more information you'll be able to pass on to people that are using it in reports. Okay. But another caution with this, so it is a text field. You can type and type and type and type and type. Just be aware that you can type like War and Peace in this field, but it only saves the first 199 characters. So just try to be concise and succinct and get everything you can in 1 or 2 sentences because you'll run out of space and not realize it until you save it and it truncated all the stuff that you just got done typing in. Okay, so 199 characters. Right. So really what I've covered so far, there's a few tips, as far as the conflicts between the definitions of filters and what's on the reporting, the date filtering that's in there, and sort of just the basics of, type mixing and stuff with custom calculations. So definitely I recommend strongly using custom calculations. A lot of people will actually redefine standard reporting values like booked with actuals that is available in OpenAir. They'll redefine it to use date ranges so they have more control over where the data is pulled in on a new version of booked with actuals. So custom calculations really gives you that reliable approach to controlling the equation and knowing that the value that you're getting is how you would be computing it if you used Excel or something like that. Okay. Make sure that the types are consistent for consistent results. So just keep that word consistent in your head and you'll be good to go. And try not to put, there's a balance between adding a bunch of filters into the custom calculation and adding a bunch of filters on a report. I like to try and make the calculation do all the work. So add all the filters that you need to in the custom calculation and let the report really just pull the data. You don't necessarily need to add any more filters to the report. It may be a date range or something like that. So have the calculation do the heavy lifting so that you avoid trying to customize the report a little too much and then causing a conflict, right? And of course, the definitions and the descriptions that you put in are really going to make it usable and sustainable going forward when you're sharing that, using that reporting value on various reports, or people are trying to figure out if that's the reporting value for them. Yeah. And really, for those of you who are math geeks like myself, just let loose. Try to look at all the different ways you're trying to do metrics. We have plenty of webinars on reporting and metrics from TopStep. Go back and listen to those, and you'll see that we're using custom calculations quite often in all those dashboard reports and metrics and stuff, because you can get from A to B by using even the simple times divided by subtraction and addition math in the system. So that brings us to the end of the material. Thank you again for coming, and if you have questions.